So, these are 4 GPUs that I bought during some of my very questionable shopping decisions. I honestly don't know why I agreed to spend money on these things in the first place. And here's the scary part. Some of these graphics cards might actually be older than some of you watching this video right now. Performance-wise? Yeah, there's absolutely nothing impressive here. But today, we're taking these ancient GPUs out of retirement and putting them through absolute torture with a game. And of course, what game could be more perfect than GTA 5, a title that's famously very well optimized for PC hardware? So the real question is, can we actually play GTA Online using the oldest GPU I own? Let's find out. To keep things fair, I'm going to test everything using one single setup. That setup will be an Intel i3 7100 paired with an H110 motherboard, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and Windows 10 Pro. Now, GTA 5 actually has 2 versions, Enhanced and Legacy, and to better match these ancient GPUs, I'll be using the Legacy version, the original release, which is lighter than Enhanced and doesn't include all the newer graphical, performance, and feature upgrades. According to the official minimum requirements, Rockstar recommends a GPU from around 2008 with 512 megabytes to 1 gigabyte of RAM. And in today's lineup, I actually have a card that fits that description, so hopefully it'll run the game. And if it does, let's see just how bad it really is. The first GPU in today's lineup is the GT730, 2 gigabytes, and this particular version uses DDR3 memory. It's a low-profile card, small and compact, making it perfect for SFF or Mini ITX cases. This card originally launched back in 2014, which means it's now about 11 years old, and it's getting pretty close to its 12th birthday. Now, this GPU was never meant for gaming, but compared to some of the more power-hungry cards out there, the GT730 is extremely power efficient. Still, being power efficient isn't enough. What I really want to know is, can it actually play games? Let's jump straight into the benchmarks and find out. To save some time, I already had the drivers pre-installed. Booting into the game took quite a while, around 2 minutes. With the GT730, the average FPS sits at around 30, which sounds fine on paper, but in reality, it's a very different story. FPS frequently drops down to around 12, and the 1% lows hit as low as 10 FPS. That means the game stutters every few seconds. This is especially noticeable when driving at high speeds, moving the camera quickly, or when other players appear in the area. After lowering the graphics settings to normal, performance in GTA 5 Online improves noticeably. FPS now hovers between 25 and 30. But more importantly, the experience is much more stable in most situations, whether you're speeding through the city or getting into shootouts with the police. Even though the visuals aren't great and the gameplay isn't super smooth, it's still playable enough for running missions, free roaming, or light gunfights. This setup is best suited for casual players who just want to have some fun and aren't too focused on PvP or fast reaction-based gameplay. If you want higher FPS and a smoother experience overall, dropping the resolution down to 720p is the way to go. At that resolution, GTA 5 Online can maintain a much more stable 45 to 50 FPS with noticeably better input response. The trade-off is lower image quality, but honestly the gameplay feels way more enjoyable. The second GPU is the GT710, also with 2 gigabytes of DDR3 VRAM. At first glance, it looks pretty similar to the GT730 I tested earlier. After checking a few reviews, it turns out the GT710 is around 30% weaker than the GT730 in terms of performance. Even though they share the same memory type and capacity, the GT710 is limited to a 64-bit memory bus. Now, the big question is, does that smaller memory bus actually have a noticeable impact on gaming performance? Well, there's only one way to find out. Let's put it to the test and see how it stacks up. Switching over to the GT710, 2 gigabytes. Still at full HD resolution with the default settings, the difference compared to the GT730 is obvious immediately. FPS now sits at around 7 to 9, which is about 5 FPS lower than the GT730 under the same conditions. At this point, the game is basically a slideshow. Movement feels clunky, and input latency is extremely high, making everything respond very slowly. After lowering the settings down to normal on the GT710, 2 gigabytes, performance does improve noticeably, but it's still far from stable. Average FPS climbs to around 40, but the 1% lows are quite low, so stuttering still happens, especially when moving quickly or when there are a lot of objects on screen. At this level, the experience is only suitable for slow-paced gameplay or simple missions. Fast driving or constant shootouts still feel pretty frustrating. It wasn't until I dropped the resolution down to 720p that things finally became more playable. FPS nearly doubled, reaching around 40 FPS during normal movement. When driving at high speeds, FPS drops to around 30, and it can dip even lower when there are lots of effects or complex scenery. Next up, we have a GPU that was released about 13 years ago, the GT630. If this thing were a person, it would probably be in middle school by now. The specs aren't anything special, it only comes with 1 GB of DDR3 VRAM, and back in the day, it was positioned as an entry-level dedicated graphics card. Basically, for PC users who wanted something better than integrated graphics. No gaming monster here, but let's see how it holds up today. When I first loaded into the game, I was shocked. The temperature shot up past 100 degrees almost instantly. That's when I realized the cooling fan was completely dead, so the GPU basically had no active cooling at all. At that point, replacing the cooler was the only option. I noticed that the GT710 I just tested could almost fit the cooler from the GT630, so I decided to swap them. But, of course, it wasn't that simple. The contact surfaces on the two coolers weren't the same, so they didn't sit flush. To fix that, I added a thin aluminum shim in between to improve contact with the GT710's die. Unfortunately, the temperatures still weren't great. After just 2 minutes of gameplay, the GPU was already back up to around 90 degrees. So I went one step further. I grabbed a CPU cooler fan and mounted it directly onto the GPU heatsink. And this time, it actually worked. Temperatures dropped significantly, settling at around 50 degrees, which is a huge improvement. At the lowest resolution, 800 by 600, with all settings turned down to the absolute minimum, FPS sits around 50 frames per second. Even when driving at high speeds, the performance stays surprisingly stable. Honestly, this resolution takes me right back to gaming 15 years ago. When I bump the resolution up to 720p, the GPU still holds up pretty well. There is some input latency, but it doesn't impact the experience too much. FPS lands at around 40, which is totally playable, as long as you're willing to sacrifice visual quality. However, once I try pushing it to 1080p, the game simply refuses to start due to VRAM limitations. And even when I force it, the game kicks me back to the settings menu. It's pretty clear that 720p is the hard limit for this GPU. And finally, the oldest one in the lineup, the GT210, released all the way back in 2009. Let's be honest, this is a terrible choice for gaming by today's standards. Its performance is so weak that it actually loses to many modern integrated GPUs. It comes with just 512 megabytes of DDR3 VRAM. But hey, this is GTA 5 we're talking about, a game that's already been proven to run on GPUs with as little as 256 megabytes of RAM. So yeah, it's going to run. The real question is how painful that experience is going to be. Let's find out. I tried loading into the game, and right away it was clear something wasn't right. The boot time was extremely long, and just as the game was about to load, it kept crashing back to desktop over and over again. So I went all out and turned everything down, both inside the game and outside of it. I even edited the settings.xml file manually, dropping the resolution all the way down to 640 by 480 and disabling every shadow effect. And somehow, it worked. The game actually loaded. But here's the weird part. Every time I pressed S to open the settings menu, the game would instantly crash again for no clear reason. After a few retries, it did let me back in long enough to run some tests. When driving at high speed, the FPS hovered around 15, which is, let's be honest, pretty bad. Input latency was massive, and everything felt delayed. If you don't have a lot of patience, I'd strongly recommend staying far away from GPUs this old. And that was just offline mode. When it comes to online, the result was the same. The game would still crash right before loading in. Thank you so much for patiently watching the entire video. I hope it brought you at least a bit of entertainment into your day. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. See you next time!